Alright guys, so in one of my recent videos I posted how to make training saps, blackjacks, and brass knuckles. From that I had a lot of questions about brass knuckles. There were a lot of misconceptions, people thinking that they didn't amplify power in any way, and I also had a lot of people that had, I would say maybe a disproportionate fear of the brass knuckle. Lots of different variations of brass knuckles. This one's made out of G10. You'll find it, that's a type of fiberglass. You'll find it in polycarbon, of course in metal, aircraft aluminum, lots of different materials. What makes a lot of these new Palmers a bit more problematic, especially if you work security, you work the door, is that they can evade detection by metal detection wands because they're not metallic. So we got to be extra careful with these. From a security perspective, brass knuckles are highly concealable. Even something as casual as putting them in the pocket can allow them to escape casual inspection. A lot of times when you see people doing frisks, sometimes it's because of comfort, sometimes it's because of policy. They don't really go up high enough, and if these are a little bit deeper towards the middle of the crotch, they can easily escape detection. People will also, generally from my experience, when we caught them a number of times under the buckle, people putting them literally right in front here, and then hiding them laterally under the belt. So when you're searching, it easily can hide under the guise of a belt buckle. In fact, there are pants that they make, I'm sure you've seen these types of belts that have brass knuckles as a buckle. And of course the most common way was just to put it in the flap of the underwear right in front, so that even if you're doing high inspection, right here it follows the midline of the person and can easily be overlooked because people don't go that deep. We were usually of the policy to go all the way up with a palm wedge, all the way up into the crease of the groin. We were allowed to. It wasn't a high-end posh bar, but even something hidden on the midline will escape that detection. If you're working with a wand or a metal detector, something like a G10 brass knuckle will escape as well. Now, the difficulty with having it in these places, of course, is that access is not rapid. But the concern we have to have is somebody that's premeditating a little bit, who has smuggled it in, has a moment to put it on quite casually. And the danger with brass knuckles is once they're on your hand, they can be basically a natural part of your gesture. People will often cover the hands and you kind of lose it in the blur. It can be mistaken for jewelry or not seen at all if you're in dim light. There are two schools of thought fundamentally with the brass knuckles. The first is that they're a very effective handheld weapon that has existed in some variation throughout history. The second is that they're more trouble than they're worth. And I tend to lie somewhere in between. For personal EDC, for everyday carry, for myself, I'm not a fan. I'll tell you why. It goes back to this whole self-defense myth about holding keys and making the Wolverine claws between your knuckles. Right? You'll see this commonly taught where the keys are placed in the webs like this, and every single successive key is supposed to be wedged in there so that you can gouge. Of course, the natural difficulty with that is that no matter how hard I pinch, these are levers. And when those levers push up, they will naturally go and rip open your finger crotch, your little webs between your fingers. Brass knuckles, to some extent, do the exact same thing. If I misstrike in any way and those rock up, then you're getting all your finger webs at the same time. And no matter how deeply I couch that, no matter how much I protect it, a lot of people will teach that the essence is to really push that palm heel in like you're spinning a web, like Spider-Man style, and that's true, that will help. But no matter how well I do that, the moment I start to tap with the brass knuckle, all of that force is being deferred from my knuckle into my palm heel. And although the palm heel is significantly more durable than the knuckles, the damage can be catastrophic. Now, as I said, the best way to learn how to defend against the threat is to improve your understanding of that threat. So if you're really going to understand the effect of a brass knuckle, you got to hit stuff with them. If you just do this on your regular punching bag or your Wave Master, you're going to cause a lot of damage. So a simple fix would be to just put a simple piece of jigsaw mat and tape it in place or wrap it in place with some rope around it. I'm going to give you a few alternatives here as well. So what I'm going to be using is about 10 pounds of sand that's been, is still in its original bag, that's been duct taped pretty heavily, just for extra reinforcement. I'm going to slip it inside a highly disposable pillowcase, representing possibly the worst Star Wars movie ever made. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to hang it up and tie it with a rope. So now you have a nice free-forming mobile target. You can work your timing, but you'll also see that it's quite durable. With a bare knuckle, it's a nice solid hard almost wood-like impact, right? So right away you see if you're striking with the right surfaces. Now we're going to test the brass knuckle, looking both at under the phalange and over the phalange. So again, a lot of people will tell you that if you use it over the phalange when you strike, it's going to grind up like keys into your finger crotches. I'm going to show you both ways. So first, under the phalange, like a leopard fist on the door knocking knuckles. This is best used for sort of tight little hooking shots, right? And if I hit like this, it's all right, it's comfortable. I find when I hit, when it's not fully braced, what ends up happening is I have to misalign my knuckles like that. And so when the impact comes in, the bottom pommel really digs into the palm. And I find that that starts to leave a pretty good mark inside my palm right away. By comparison, if I fully couch it up like proper punching alignment, what's going to happen is when that gets hit, the majority of that is going into the sort of fat of the palm, right? So. I'm going to try it with a basic winter glove on, so that gives me a little bit more insulation. Now even when I'm hitting, I can still feel pretty good transmission of power into the hand. I wouldn't really want to go much harder than that. It's starting to dig right into the base of the palm. You can see the redness that's developing there. So overall, I'm not punching with anything close to the power that I would if I was bare knuckle. Bare knuckle, I can head it even on the edge, and I can throw with a bit more abandon and not really have to worry too much about it. Now I'm going to look at giving a shot on a basic Makiwara. If you're not familiar with a Makiwara, it's a very shallow cord pad. This is just one layer of burlap rope with a single skin of vinyl on top, and the vinyl is really there just to make it more hygienic so we can wash it if people bloody up the knuckles. When we hit, the boards are compounded. They're designed to absorb, so there's a level of absorption. But this is really to teach correct alignment of the fist. Now, to protect my vinyl, to protect my structure, I've just made a little sleeve here, a jigsaw mat that I can mangle up. So this gives a little extra cushion even, right? But I see right away, barehanded, I'm very comfortable punching with good power. And you can see the alignment, the pitting you get from the knuckle. By comparison, if you do this with the brass knuckle, I can cause damage quite easily, you'll see on the skin. But that's about as hard as I would want to punch. By comparison, it's more damaging, but it is causing a little bit of palm redness, a little bit of palm pain. All we need to do is stand up in front of a concrete wall, put those brass knuckles on, and begin tapping a little bit. I'll see that I'll make pitting on the cement, and you can see some pitting on the cement, which would be significant damage on a face, but already at that power, it's starting to cause irritation. If I had gone anything harder than that, enough to dent, now right away I start to get little dings on my knuckles, and I start to really damage the palm. Whereas an open palm and a gouge into the face, thumb into the eye, this kind of basic action would have caused much more damage, affected the processing system of the person, interrupted their pattern, and not damaged me in any way. Now, there are a number of hand fittings and devices that can be used that relate very, very closely to something like brass knuckles. The most classic would be the Kubotan, or even if you look at a more modern interpretation like a tactical pen, they all stem from a more traditional tool called the Yawara, which is usually somewhat sculpted to fit the hand, somewhat larger with protuberances on both ends. Something like a Yawara creates tremendous concussive force with no damage to my hand. It's very, very effortless to hold. The exact same is true of Kubotans. Kubotans were something, guys, that we used to use at the door, even in security in the early days. Now that would be super taboo. But I've seen a lot of people use them for self-defense. I've used them in a lot of resistant training, hit a few people with them as well. They really don't, in my experience, damage the user's hand if they're holding them well. Sometimes with the Kubotan, especially the smaller ones, people feel safer in the air putting their thumb on top But I'm generally of the opinion that when you do that, although it feels good in the air, when you strike, you're taking all the force on the thumb. So I actually like to just squeeze it. And even if I'm using something like the smallest possible regular pen, if you squeeze it without putting your thumb on top and just hit, it might slide a little bit after many, many hits. There's still a nub usually showing out, and it just amplifies your damage to a very small, hard surface area. So I'm a big believer in those. Take a look at this little basic pen. I'm just going to squeeze it hard. We see how much nub we have there. No thumb on top, just full squeeze. And we see how much damage I can create, and it barely slips down. That's after multiple shots. If I go to something a little bit larger, like a flashlight, same deal. I'll hold that. We see that the bezel is not moving in any way. So it definitely gives me a shot. I can still punch, and I can work with either side. So for my money, something like this is much more natural to hold and carry. You got to be careful, of course, and make sure that you know how you're aligning things like clips and other things in your hand so that they cause the least amount of damage. But anything, even a pen, will be more useful and cause more shocking damage. Again, just like the brass knuckle, or any improvised weapon for that matter, the tool is limited, right? Everything has its own limitation, and it needs to be used within its limitation. If I take something like a pen like this and I stab long, naturally it could break, snap, and be of no value. But if I choke it up, have just the littlest bit of nub, and I work with that, then it can amplify damage, give me a psychological advantage, and detract a little bit, shock, and cause pattern interrupts, causing more damage than the subject expects. Things like Yawara evolved. This is a Shinbo, which is basically a modified Yawara with a finger ring. There's many reasons for the finger ring. You'll see people spinning them and doing all these demos and fancy stuff, but the main reason was to facilitate retention. So you see here, the damage is catastrophic. Huge, huge, huge. It's making its way through to this pad with very little effort. And the reason this was also added was so that the subject could then flip it to the back of their hands to access weapon. And arguably this could facilitate some kind of defense, but really it was just to get out of the way without dropping your tool, and then you could bring it back into play if you needed to. This often would have a rope tether in the early days, so it became like a D-ring, and that eventually evolved to things like the teko. Teko is an Okinawan weapon, which is fashioned out of a horse stirrup. They can sometimes have spikes as well on the edges, but the teko is extremely powerful. When I hold the teko, because there is space between the ridge and my hand, it can be kept taut in the hand by flaying the fingers. It can be pursed on the side with the thumb to allow me to strike with the palm, which gives me a reinforced steel bridge across the face with no damage to my hand. You see it's quite comfortable, but it can also be turned, and then striking can occur with this. And look, we're barely touching. We can see the damage that's creating. That's going clean through with very, very little effort. It's piercing the entire pad. Even the smallest shot will create damage. I can use the inside edge, the hammer fist edge as well, or even knife edges if my hand is kept taut. The teko, for me, is a far superior weapon to a brass knuckle. This kind of fitting with the spacer. Again, fit is very important, so it stays on the hand. You will, however, even in teko kata and techniques, see people teaching the idea of putting it on the back of the hand to block outwardly and to take shots. But any impact here, of course, will transfer a little bit to the hand. So I'm not a big fan of blocking in that way. I was always taught to block like an outside block or an inside block with the teko, so every block becomes a destruction. But as a striking tool, whether it's with palm or with fist, it is a fantastic implement, and in my opinion, although it's in the same family as brass knuckles, it's far superior.